Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to go deep.
Today we're tackling a concept that's both fascinating and, honestly, a little intimidating. Social capital.
Yeah, it can definitely feel like one of those buzzwords.
Right, like is it just a fancy way of saying networking?
Well, it's definitely related to networking, but it's much more than just collecting business cards or schmoozing at events.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So before we get lost in the jargon, what exactly are we talking about when we say social capital?
At its core, it's about understanding how your relationships translate into resources and opportunities.
So not just WHO, but how those connections can actually help you.
Precisely. Think of it like this. You know how money can grow if you invest it wisely?
Sure, compound interest and all that.
Well, your relationships are a type of investment too. They're a form of capital.
Okay, so not just another networking lecture, but hold on, back up a sec. When we say capital, what exactly are we talking about beyond just dollars and cents?
Good point. Capital, in the broadest sense, is really anything you invest for a future payoff.
So like stocks, bonds, real estate.
Exactly. That's your financial capital, the more traditional stuff. But there's also human capital.
Human capital, so like my skills and knowledge.
Exactly, the stuff you bring to the table. Education, training, experiences all increase your value, especially in the job market.
Makes sense. So like the years I spent honing my podcasting skills, that's an investment in my human capital.
Precisely. And just like any investment, you can actively work to increase your human capital through education, training, new experiences.
So it's not just what you know, but also how you know to apply it.
And that's where cultural capital comes in.
Cultural capital, another layer.
Think of it as understanding the unwritten rules of the game in your society.
Interesting.
Knowing when to speak up, when to listen, how to dress for that big presentation. These are all examples.
So it's kind of like having the secret decoder ring for different social settings.
Exactly. It comes from your upbringing, education, even the media you consume. It helps you navigate social situations and fit in, and that can open doors just as much as technical skills, sometimes even more.
Wow, this is already making me rethink how I approach, well, everything. But we still haven't gotten to the main course, social capital. What makes it different from these other types?
It all comes down to the network of connections you build.
So like how many Facebook friends I have.
More than just the number of connections, it's about the web of relationships you have access to, even indirectly.
So it's not just my immediate contacts, but who they know too.
Precisely. Imagine you're looking for a new job. You might not personally know the hiring manager, but a friend of a friend might.
Okay, starting to see how this all connects. But are all connections created equal? I mean, surely my close friends are more valuable than random acquaintances, right?
That's where it gets really interesting. There's this concept called the strength of weak ties.
Strength of weak ties, what's that about?
Sometimes those more distant connections, people you wouldn't necessarily call close friends, they can be even more valuable than your inner circle.
Wait, really? How could someone I barely know be more helpful than my best friend?
Because close friends often run in the same circles as you. You have access to the same information, the same resources. But weaker ties, they bridge different social worlds.
Okay, I see what you mean. Like, they can bring you insights or opportunities that you wouldn't have found on your own.
Exactly. It's like having a network of scouts bringing you intel from all corners of the world.
Suddenly, my LinkedIn feed feels way more strategic.
And remember, strong ties are important too, especially for emotional support or navigating really tough situations. It's about understanding the different roles that different types of relationships play in your overall social capital.
This is mind-blowing. It's like seeing the matrix code behind everyday interactions. But this brings up a question. Is everyone playing on a level playing field when it comes to social capital? Like, what if you just don't start out with a lot of connections?
That's a crucial point. Social capital, just like other forms of capital, isn't distributed equally.
So not everyone starts the game at the same level.
Exactly. Your background, gender, race, even where you grew up, can significantly impact your access to connections and resources.
That's not really fair, is it?
Sociologists call this the capital deficit, and it can create a real disadvantage, especially when it comes to building social capital.
So even if you're talented and work hard, you might still be held back if you don't have the right connections.
Unfortunately, that can be the case. Let's imagine a young entrepreneur from a disadvantaged background trying to launch a business. They might struggle to find funding or mentorship because they lack access to those networks of investors and experienced entrepreneurs.
Okay, that's a really concrete example of how this capital deficit plays out. It's starting to feel a bit heavy. So is social capital just another way that the system keeps certain people ahead?
That's where things get really interesting. Because social capital exists not just for individuals, but also for groups, organizations, and even whole societies. It's the glue that holds communities together.
So we've gone from me and my network to how social capital shapes entire societies. That's a big leap. It's like social capital can be this individual tool, BUT also a force driving large-scale change.
Exactly. Think about how institutions change. It's rarely just one person at the top. It's often a network of people with shared ideas, resources, and influence pushing for change. That's social capital in action.
So more of a collective effort than a top-down decree. Gives me hope, honestly. But how does that actually play out?
Think about how people work within existing institutions to create change.
Like getting elected to office or rising through the ranks of a company to make a difference.
Exactly. It's about gaining influence within the system and using that influence to push for change.
That makes me think of the women's suffrage movement.
Yeah.
How women had to really organize and advocate within the existing political system to gain the right to vote.
A perfect example. The suffrage movement relied heavily on building strong networks, forming alliances, and leveraging their collective influence.
But that must have taken immense coordination and trust. It wasn't just a few friends chatting over tea, right?
Not at all. It took years of organizing, building relationships, sharing resources, and working together towards that shared goal.
So it wasn't just about individual connections, but about how those connections formed a powerful collective force.
Exactly. And sometimes working within the system isn't enough. Sometimes those in power resist change.
Because they benefit from the status quo.
Often, yes. And that's when we see social capital fueling entirely new structures, ones that exist parallel to the existing systems.
So instead of trying to change the system from within, they create their own alternative system.
Precisely. Think about the rise of new political parties or social movements that challenge the existing power structures.
Bold move.
Uh,
But how does social capital play into their success?
Starting something new requires immense trust, shared resources, and a deep belief in that alternative vision.
So it's about finding people who share your values and are willing to take that leap of faith together.
Exactly. And social capital provides that foundation. It allows those groups to connect, organize, and mobilize resources.
This reminds me of the early days of the internet. It started as this niche community of tech enthusiasts and researchers, but through their connections, collaboration, and shared vision, it transformed the world.
A fantastic example. The internet's growth really highlights the power of social capital, especially its ability to transcend geographical boundaries.
And now we have this whole world of online communities and social media. That's got to be a game changer for social capital, right?
Absolutely. Online platforms allow us to connect with like-minded people regardless of where they live. This has huge implications for social movements, for finding support groups, for accessing information and resources.
Like during the pandemic, when online communities became so vital for people who were isolated and struggling.
Exactly. That's a powerful testament to how digital social capital can foster a sense of belonging and provide support, even when we can't be physically together.
But I imagine there are downsides to all this online connectivity, right? I mean, it's not all sunshine and roses.
Of course. Like offline social capital, it can be a double-edged sword. We've seen how online platforms can create echo chambers and reinforce existing biases.
So it's not just about connecting with more people online. It's about being mindful of WHO we connect with.
Exactly. And it's crucial to be aware of the potential for misinformation and manipulation. Not everything you see online is true or trustworthy.
So we need to be savvy consumers of online information.
Absolutely. And we need to be aware of the power dynamics at play. Who controls the algorithms? Who benefits from the data we're sharing? These are important questions to consider.
This all feels very relevant to those debates about social media's impact on elections and political discourse, like how online social capital can be used to influence voters or spread propaganda.
That's a complex issue, and it highlights the importance of media literacy and critical thinking. We need to be aware of how our online interactions can shape our perceptions and beliefs.
It's like we need a whole new set of social skills for navigating the digital world.
I think we're still figuring those out, but before we get too deep into the digital rabbit hole, I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier, social capital and inequality.
Yeah, we talked about the capital deficit and how that can put some folks at a disadvantage from the start.
But even beyond that, it's important to acknowledge that social capital itself can perpetuate inequality, even if everyone started with equal access.
Wait, really? I thought social capital was supposed to be this great equalizer. How could it actually make things less equal?
Well, think about how social networks operate. They often work based on this principle of homophily.
Homophily. That sounds complicated.
It's actually a pretty simple concept. It just means that people tend to associate with others who are similar to themselves.
Birds of a feather flock together.
Exactly. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, it can become problematic when those social networks control access to valuable resources and opportunities.
So if you're not part of the in-group, you're essentially locked out, no matter how talented you are.
It's not always that black and white, but those dynamics definitely exist. For example, research shows that hiring decisions are often influenced by social connections.
So if a company relies on referrals or internal networks to fill up positions, people who aren't already connected might miss out.
Precisely. And this can disproportionately impact people from underrepresented groups who might not have the same access to those informal networks.
That's incredibly frustrating. So what can we do about it? How do we harness the power of social capital for good while mitigating its potential downsides? Especially this inequality piece. That's the million-dollar question, right? We've seen how social capital can be this incredible force for good, but also how it can reinforce inequalities.
It's definitely a complex issue.
So how do we even begin to address that?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that social capital is used to create a more equitable world, not just benefit those who are already ahead?
It's not a simple answer,
I figured as much.
but I think it starts with awareness. Recognizing that social capital I measure a resource, just like money or education.
Okay, so first step, acknowledge the problem.
Right. And then start thinking about what we can do to level the playing field, both as individuals and as a society.
Okay, so let's break that down. What can we do on a personal level?
It starts with understanding your own social capital landscape. Who are your strong ties? Who are your weak ties? What kind of resources do you have access to?
So kind of like taking an inventory of my network, not just the number of connections, but also the quality and diversity of those connections.
Exactly. Are you surrounded by people who challenge you, expose you to new ideas, connect you to different worlds?
Or am I just stuck in an echo chamber?
It's not about judging yourself. It's about being mindful of how your network might be shaping your opportunities, for better or worse.
You're making me rethink my entire social media feed. But, okay, let's say I've done that personal inventory. What's next? How do I actually start building more equitable social capital? Like, what actions can I take?
One really powerful approach is mentorship.
Mentorship.
Yeah. If you're in a position to offer guidance, support, or connections, think about reaching out to someone who could benefit from your experience.
That's a great point. I've had some incredible mentors who helped me get where I am today, and I've tried to do the same for others whenever I can.
And it doesn't have to be a huge formal commitment.
Right. Even just a quick coffee chat or making an introduction can make a difference.
Exactly. And remember, building social capital is a two-way street. It's not just about what you can get, but also what you can give.
Pay it forward, right?
Exactly. When you contribute to your community, support others, share your knowledge, you're not only strengthening your own WN social capital, you're helping create a more equitable and vibrant community for everyone.
This has given me a whole new perspective on networking. It's not just about climbing the ladder. It's about using our connections to lift each other up.
That's the heart of it.
But I also hear you saying that individual actions can only go so far.
Right. We also need systemic solutions to address the root causes of inequality in social capital.
So bigger picture stuff, like what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, investing in education and community programs that connect people from different backgrounds is huge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Breaking down those silos.
Creating mentorship opportunities specifically for underrepresented groups can be really impactful.
So making sure everyone has a chance to connect with people who can open doors for them.
Exactly. And of course, supporting policies that promote economic and social mobility is crucial, giving everyone a fair shot to succeed, regardless of their background.
It's about leveling the playing field, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's about shifting our mindset away from this scarcity mentality, this idea that social capital is a zero-sum game where if one person wins, someone else has to lose.
There's enough to go around for everyone.
Absolutely. If we're willing to share and collaborate, we can create a world where everyone has the opportunity to build and leverage their social capital.
Wow, this has been an incredible deep dive. We've gone from defining social capital to exploring its impact on individuals, communities, even entire societies.
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure.
We talked about the power of weak ties, the challenges of the capital deficit, and even how social capital plays out online. It's a lot to process.
It really is, and it's something we all need to be thinking about.
Absolutely. So to our listeners, we challenge you. Take a look at your network. Think about how you can invest in it and consider how you can use your social capital, big or small, to create a more equitable and connected world. It's not just about who you know, it's about what you do with those connections.
That's what makes all the difference. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time, keep those connections strong.